What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be ranking every first round draft slot in 2026 fantasy football drafts. So, putting together kind of a tier list, looking at my favorite spots to draft here in 2026, and then some of my least favorite. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Would love to hear your feedback. If you want to make a case for a certain pick being higher or lower, I'd love to hear it. But we're going to start off here by talking about the 101, and honestly, we can put the 102 in there also, because I think these are the two best slots to draft here in 2026. So I'm going to have the 101 and the 102 in S tier. And I'm going to show this graphic a lot throughout this video, but this is what the current consensus ADP is looking like. So you have picks 1 through 4. You have this pocket with Gibbs, Bijan, Chase, Puka. You have a pretty clear 5 through 8 with CMC, JSN, JT, Amon-Ra. You can see the players going in the later first. We've got early to mid round 2, the 2-3 turn, and then round 3. So I'm kind of going to be talking through the players you're going to be looking at from all these different slots. And starting off with the 101 and the 102, a big reason why I like these top two picks are that you're able to lock down, one of these top two running backs with Jahmyr Gibbs and or Bijan Robinson. I think that's a really strong start to your lineup. And then when you get to the 2-3 turn area, I think there are a lot of interesting players on the board. You have the opportunity to get an elite tight end like a Brock Bowers. Josh Allen's going here. To be honest, I'm not considering him. I think you have some interesting wide receiver options with George Pickens, Nico Collins, Rashee Rice. A.J. Brown has the potential to slip there. Certain platforms, maybe you get like a falling Kenneth Walker, something like that. But you also have the opportunity to get a guy like Jeremiah Love, maybe in the early third round, which I think would be really interesting as a running back too. And so I do just like some of the combinations. If you want to go hero RB, you can go Gibbs or Bijan. You can get, a Bowers, a Pickens. You can go 2 wide receivers, get a Pickens and a Neighbors, maybe A.J. Brown slips. I'm just really confident in the starts you can build from that spot. Also have the opportunity to go double hero RB if you get a falling running back or you like Jeremiah Love there at that 2-3 turn. I made a video talking about my favorite pick this season, and it was the 101 and the 102. Now looking at the 103, I also really like this pick. I'm going to put this one in the A tier. And the reason why I'm not quite as high is that you're not guaranteed to get a stud running back from this slot. It's pretty unlikely that one of Gibbs or Bijan are going to fall there to the 103. So you're getting Jamar Chase, which is not some sort of bummer. Like, I think getting Chase there is a really solid pick. You're just less locked in to getting one of those top RBs. Now, when you're picking at the 210 instead of the 211 or the 212, you do have a better opportunity to get a falling running back in the back end of the second, whether that's a Kenneth Walker. Derrick Henry might just be there, and I think he's a fine pick in that range. But then you could also go with Jeremiah Love in that range or the early third round. But once again, you're looking at the same pool of players in that 2-3 turn. I think the drop-off is greater from Jamar Chase to some of the guys going in the mid to late first round than the drop-off is from those like early to mid round 2 picks to the back end of the second round. And then also I think there's a drop-off after like that early third round area where if you're picking mid to late third round, I don't know if there's a massive gap going into the fourth round. I think like the tiers really start to flatten out there. So I do like the 103 starting with Jamar Chase. You could go running back. You could get another wide receiver, tight end, could be an option. I like that slot. It's an A tier. Then the 104, I'm going to have this in B tier. Now, I originally had this also in A tier with the 103, but a potential Puka Nacua suspension does have me a little bit sketched out. I would still take him here at the 104, but I did feel like there was a pretty clear tier break. If he does get hit with some sort of suspension, I don't think it would be like a huge one, but even, 1-2 games, I do think that kind of separates him a little bit from these top 3. So it is going to go in B tier. I do think, the earlier you're going to pick in the second round, the more likely it is you do get a value. I think early to mid round 2, I do think it's kind of a flatter tier than some other people. And so I still think this is a solid pick. It's actually my fourth favorite selection. If we're going in order, I like the 101, the 102, the 103, and then the 104. But that is why it's, separated by a tier or two from those top three picks. Then looking at the 105, I'm going to put this pick in C tier. I don't hate it, but I do feel like you're kind of reaching at the top of a tier, which I don't necessarily love doing. Now, you do have some upside that maybe a Puka or maybe a Jamar Chase fall to at the 105, although I don't think that's going to happen, very often. And so then you do have this tier with CMC, JSN, Jonathan Taylor, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I don't know if I feel so confident, identifying the best guy in that tier. Right now, I'd be going with Christian McCaffrey. I think from an upside perspective, he is the answer here. But also, there's a lot of injury risk. He's coming off a monster touch season. He has an extensive injury history. He's getting up there in age. Like, CMC doesn't feel amazing picking him at the 105, but then I also don't necessarily love the idea of going JSN or Amon-Ra. And so I still think there are going to be some interesting options in the second round. You could definitely, have a stronger double hero RB start if you're looking at, Kenneth Walker in this range. Maybe you get a Chase Brown or a Hampton to slip a little bit. You have the option to go tight end. You have some interesting wide receiver options. This could be Drake London. It could be A.J. Brown. So I think it's fine. I think I'm kind of more middle of the road from the 105. And I feel pretty similarly about the 106. Now, the 106, I feel a little bit worse than the 105 because I do like CMC as my fifth overall player. When you get to the 106, I've actually made the swap and I've moved Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of JSN. And so Amon-Ra would be my pick at the 106. The problem is it just doesn't really feel like you're getting a value because according to consensus ADP, Amon-Ra is going off the board as the 108. And so in that range, I'd probably be reaching on a player that I could get one or two spots later, if I was picking at a different draft position. So once again, you're looking at similar options in the second round. I do think once you're getting into round 3, it does fall off a little bit, but there are still some interesting names in this range. I'd feel great about getting Malik Neighbors mid-round 3. I'd be cool taking Olave there. I think Devonta Smith, Breece Hall, also interesting options in that range. But I do think there's a fall off from that early round 3 into mid-round 3. So those are going to be the two picks in my C tier. Then looking at the 107, this one's going to go in B tier. And I do like the 107 because, like I mentioned, Amon-Ra is now my 106. But I also think that if you get JSN or Amon-Ra at the 107, I think you feel pretty good about it. And then once again, you're just going to have more agency with your second pick. Maybe this is a Chase Brown, a Drake London, whoever in that second round. And then I'm also going to have the 108 in this B tier. If I can get my 106 at the 108, I do think that's a pretty solid bargain. And then even if Amon-Ra is off the board, I still feel fine about getting a Jonathan Taylor if somehow JSN slips. Like, I think these are all fine options from the 108 spot. You do just start to get a little bit, less confident with those round 3 options, the later you're picking in the first round, which then also would be later in the third round. And then the final kind of grouping here, I do think it's interesting the way the picks are kind of separated, where there seem to be a clear top 4, then a next top 4, and then kind of the similar names going in the late first round. I'm going to put the 109 actually as my least favorite pick, so it's going to be in D tier. Now, you could make the case that there's some upside that Amon-Ra slips to this spot, which I do think is possible. But from what I've seen with the consensus ADP, it does feel like this is kind of a cutoff point. And so I don't know if it's super likely he is going to fall to that spot. And then I think if you're getting into that next tier, it does just feel like you're reaching in this tier with James Cook, Ashton Genty, Devon Achane, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. Personally, I don't like Achane in this group. I don't really think he belongs here. But I also don't feel super strongly about, Ashton Genty versus Justin Jefferson. I'd be fine just kind of taking whichever guy slips and then having more agency picking at the very start of the second round. So barring Amon-Ra falling, I don't necessarily love reaching in that tier. Now, I do think you can make the case that if you do feel strongly about Cook versus Genty versus Lamb versus Jefferson, or maybe you're a Devon Achane guy, then I also don't think there's like a huge gap between those early round 2 guys. And so that could be the case you make, but just not a huge fan of the 109. Then the 110, I'm also going to put this in D tier. Spoiler alert, I'm not a big fan of picking in the later first round. I do think it's one spot ahead of the 109 though, because you're still going to have your choice of like a Genty, a CD Lamb, a Justin Jefferson, maybe James Cook is also there. And then you're in this range where you could take a Saquon, a Chase Brown, maybe you have Kenneth Walker. I'm probably a little bit lower on Amari and Hampton than consensus ADP, but still kind of looking at the similar groupings. And then we can just put these next two together. I have the 112 at the top of D tier, and then the 111 between the 112 and the 110. I do like the idea of being able to kind of just take from the bottom of that tier, but specifically from the 112, if this is kind of a consensus 5 here, it's possible that if Devon Achane goes between these guys or before these guys, that you could get Lamb and Jefferson. You could get Genty and Lamb. You could get Genty and Jefferson at the 112-201. And I do think that is a pretty fun start because I do think there's a tier gap from those guys into like the early to mid round 2 names. Now, the one thing I don't necessarily love about that is I do like the idea of getting a running back in this range. Like, I think there's a lot of interesting picks. You have Cook, Genty, Achane, Saquon, Chase Brown, Hampton, Kenneth Walker. I think all of those are interesting names in this 1-2 turn area. And if you do double tap wide receiver, from a value perspective, I get it. You know, you start off with Jefferson and Lamb. That's a fantastic 1-2 punch at wide receiver, but you do kind of back yourself into a corner if you don't love the values at the 3-4 turn. And so if you're not getting a Breece or a Kyron to fall to you, you might end up having to reach at some point, which isn't necessarily ideal. I do think this early to mid round 2 range is kind of interesting because, like, for me personally, I have Kenneth Walker ranked much higher than this. I just don't think there's a ton of consensus here. And like, do I feel so much better about Saquon than Walker? No. I think Drake London, I talked about him in my Vegas projection videos. Like, he projects pretty similarly to CD Lamb and Justin Jefferson. And so just to kind of put a bow on this, I do think the gap between, you know, the top 4 picks is definitely larger than the gap. The gap from 1 through 4, I think, is larger from 5 through 8 in the late first than the gap is from those players you're getting in the early to mid second versus the players you're getting in the, you know, late second round if you do have one of those early picks. I also think there's a drop off after that early third round. And so, yeah, you're getting a worse player. If you're picking 1 through 4, you're getting a worse player in the second round. You know, you're picking maybe a Pickens instead of a London, or, you know, maybe you don't like Brock Bowers as much as some of these running backs or wide receivers. But I also think then you're getting a really strong early third round pick. And then when you're looking at the middle of the first round, I still feel, you know, kind of mid-level on those picks. I do think there's a drop off from that 5 through 8 area. But then I still think in that second round, mid round 2, you're looking at a lot of the similar names you could be looking at if you're picking early round 2. Like, I'd consider Kenneth Walker early round 2. If I'm picking in mid round 1, I can probably just get him in the middle of the second round. I can look at Trey McBride. Maybe Drake London slips there. And so those are my overall thoughts. I really like the first 4 picks. That's where I want to be. I think the middle of the first round is fine. I'm not a huge fan of the late first, and it's not necessarily that the picks don't feel great, because I do think you can get a solid 1-2 punch, but I think the 3-4 turn, that's where there's just not a ton of, you know, consensus there, and so it does feel like you're kind of reaching in a larger tier, and then it just feels like you're not collecting any value when you're picking in late round 1. Like, there aren't players that feel like they're really falling to you, and then you are picking at that top of that next tier when you're getting into the early second. So those are my thoughts. Would like to hear your, thoughts down below. Do you agree, disagree with these rankings? Let me hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.